Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to Responsive Web Design 2, Lecture 14. Today, we are going to be learning about, we'll do a little brief thing about frameworks and libraries, but the big topic is going to be Bootstrap. So we get to learn about Bootstrap today, which is a CSS framework. Okay, we'll spend 2 weeks actually learning about Bootstrap. So that should be exciting. Announcements. The only announcement I have on the slide anyway, is the sign-in sheet. We're not doing sign-in sheets anymore. I only do them for the first half. I don't want to do it anymore. So no sign-in sheet. I do want to make this announcement in case I forget at the end of the class. Next, on Thursday, we'll be having a work period. So you just come in. There won't be any lecture. You'll just come in and you work. I will be here, but I'm going to be late. I have a scheduling conflict, so I might be no more than a half hour late. But I will be here for help. Again, it's a work period, so it's basically optional if you come or not. We won't learn anything, but I will be here eventually to help you out. Okay, so that's on Thursday. Are there any questions? What's that? Oh, no, this is not our last lecture for the class. This is the last lecture for the week. Yeah, we still have 4 more weeks, 5 more weeks. Yeah. So, more stuff coming. Any other questions? Everyone enjoy their break? Yeah, kind of. Don't want to come back yet. It's understandable. All right, there's no other questions. Let's jump right into frameworks and libraries. This is real quick. So when we talk about frameworks and libraries, we need to talk about a couple common terms related to programming. The first one is DRY, which stands for don't repeat yourself. So once you get out there in the real world and you start doing a lot of things you're doing with code, you realize you do a lot of the same things over again. And you often need to utilize the same CSS, the same JavaScript, the same HTML, and it gets very repetitive. So when we talk about don't repeat yourself and this other term, don't reinvent the wheel, we're often talking about if we're constantly using this code over again, we should make it available or make it accessible for us so that we can use it quickly. So we don't have to keep writing the same code over again or having to keep remembering how to write it. That's how frameworks and libraries got where they are. Right? Somebody found some or created some code that they really liked and they were using often, and they said, I should make a library, or I should make a framework based off of this so that it can more easily be inserted into my project. And because there are so many developers out there who do this, there are many libraries and frameworks out there that are out there for anybody to use. They're open source. Almost everything on the web is open source. It's a very open source type of environment. So it means that when somebody comes up with this great idea to create a library framework, it makes lives better for everybody. Okay? So more specifically, frameworks and libraries are a collection of functions or methods. Function and methods, this is more for JavaScript. But with CSS, which is what we're talking about in this course, it's going to be styles and definitions. Okay, so there are CSS frameworks and libraries. They'll adhere to a coding pattern or methodology that's very specific to whatever framework or library you're looking at. And these libraries, to differ between a framework and a library, libraries can be added to a new project or an existing project. Can be added to an existing project. This is, again, more specific to JavaScript. So you'll see this again if you next term when you take Introduction to JavaScript. So when we talk about libraries, specifically JavaScript libraries, it's something we can add easily to an existing project. Whereas a framework is something we mostly build on new projects. Now, the term for CSS frameworks, you'll hear that term. Bootstrap is what we call a CSS framework. It really can be added to a new project, but generally you build off of it. Okay, so it's not something like, oh, I just need this little thing, I'm just going to add it here. It's more of, I need to start this project, and really I should build the whole thing off of Bootstrap, so I'm going to start a new. All right, so Here are some examples of CSS frameworks and libraries. So on the left here are a list of frameworks. Now this is not at all an exhaustive list. There are so many, I couldn't even list them all. But here are some of the more popular ones. So we have Bootstrap, Boomla, Foundation, Materialize, CSS Pure, Semantic, and UI Kit. Bootstrap is probably the most popular framework out there right now. It's created by Twitter a long time ago. I don't think they maintain it anymore. It's kind of an open source project. But it's still very, very popular. Foundation is quite popular. Materialize has become popular over the more recent years. It is based off of the Google Android material design. Some of these other ones are more specific. For example, Pure is about being very lightweight and small. Okay, so those are just some different frameworks you can look at. They generally all work about the same. In the middle are some more vanity frameworks. NES, as you might gather from the name, is a Nintendo knockoff kind of framework. It makes your site look like an 8-bit game. And Paper makes your site look like it was hand-drawn. It's quite cool. So those are some vanity ones. The last list there are animation libraries. So if you're struggling with creating animations or adding animations to your site, these are some libraries that have developed animations already. And they're quite good, okay, because they've worked hard on making the animations look realistic, and they're quite easy to add to your existing project. Okay, so those are some animation libraries. You can take a look at that. These lists, by the way, are all on the course website. You can take a look at those. All right, so that was our brief talk about frameworks and libraries. I just like to mention it so you understand when we talk about working off of these frameworks and libraries, you know what we're referring to. So now let's jump right into talking about Bootstrap. Okay, so Bootstrap is a CSS framework. It is open source and it is a responsive framework, which means that it has its own grid that is responsive. It's mobile first too. It's based off of mobile first, and it has this responsive grid, which is probably the most popular part of Bootstrap. Okay. Along with being a responsive framework, it includes its own custom normalized CSS. So you've probably in Responsive Design 1, we haven't really talked about it that much in this course, but in Responsive Design 1, Responsive Web Design 1, you probably talked about reset or normalized CSS, which is kind of setting up your style sheets at the beginning so that all browsers kind of view things the same way. Well, Bootstrap has created their own. It's called Reboot, and they've added some customizations to the way things should look in the browser. Okay. As I mentioned, they do have a responsive grid system. We will be spending next week talking about the responsive grid system in detail because there's quite a bit to it and how to understand how to work with it. And it also has an extensive component library. So if there's things you want to do, say create a carousel, one of those rotating banners at the top of the page, Bootstrap has one for you. You just add in the HTML, the classes, and boom, you're ready to go. It has a navigation system, it has buttons, it has alerts, it has cards, lists, all sorts of things that you could think, anything you could, not everything, but there's many things you can want to add to your site, UI elements that have been built into Bootstrap, and it really just takes a little bit of HTML and some styles, or adding some classes to the HTML, and you're good to go. All right, so it's pretty impressive. Now, what is Bootstrap built off of? It's built off of Sass and jQuery. Okay, Sass, we will be talking about Sass in this class. That will be what we'll be spending the last couple of weeks doing, is talking about Sass. And jQuery is a JavaScript library, which you will get introduced to in Introduction to JavaScript next term. All right, so how do we install Bootstrap? Well, there's two common ways to install Bootstrap. The first is to download the files. So you can just go to their website, you can download all those files, add them to your project, and then you just insert the scripts and insert the style sheets, and you're good to go. The other way is to use a content delivery network. Now, what a content delivery network is a set of servers out there that store these files for us so that we can just point to them. The benefit of using a content delivery network is that it will, if other sites use the same network and somebody visits those other sites, when they come to your site, they don't have to download those resources again because their browser would have cached them and it's just like free to them. Okay, so it speeds up your sites. That's why we like content delivery network. We'll be using the CDN in this class just for simplicity. All right, so Bootstrap comes with both CSS and JavaScript files. So many of the components that they have, especially if there's interaction with it, will require JavaScript. The huge benefit of using Bootstrap is you often don't even need to write any JavaScript or know anything about JavaScript to be able to use the components. Because they just said, hey, just slap this HTML onto your page and it just works like magic. And it really does. Really does. Now, if you want to make some customizations, then you're going to need to use some JavaScript. But for the most part, it just works. There is a starter template, and I'm going to show you what that looks like. We'll actually be using it in a hands-on here. That you can start with when you want to use Bootstrap. It will give you the right files that you need using the CDN, and give you kind of base HTML structure that you can work with. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at that right now. So if we go out to our website, or excuse me, not the website, go to your browser, we're going to go to the Bootstrap website, which is getbootstrap.com. So you can just go to your browser and type in getbootstrap.com. This is the official website for Bootstrap. This is also where all their documentation will be. And I highly recommend you take a look at their documentation. It is very well done, and it's pretty easy to follow. So if there's things you want to know how to do in Bootstrap, especially when it comes to components, we will not be covering a fraction of what Bootstrap can do, especially with all the components. But we're going to spend a little bit of time showing you how you can do a few things in their components, but you're going to have to spend a lot of time on your own because there's just too much to cover in this class. But again, you just follow what the documentation shows you. It's fairly straightforward. All right, so again, this is the Bootstrap website, Get Bootstrap. This is what it looks like. Generally, where you want to go is just go to the Get Started page. You can hit the big Get Started button, and it's just giving you an introduction. It's telling you how you can install everything. But we're going to scroll down to the starter template. So about part way down this page, you'll find this starter template. Okay, so this is the starter template I was talking about. So it's got the HTML structured the way we need it to, and it includes the Bootstrap CSS right here, which is pointing to the Bootstrap CDN, as well as the script tags that we're going to need. Now it's including several script tags because there's some dependencies that are required, including jQuery and Popper. We're not going to worry too much about the JavaScript. We're not going to really be working with JavaScript in this course, but we're going to leave those in there. All right, so let's go ahead and copy this template. So you can just click the little copy button. That'll copy it to your clipboard. And then let's go to VS Code and to our project. All right, but before we open up VS Code, what we do need to do is make a folder for our project that we're going to be working on. So I'm already in my MTM6201 folder. So just go to whatever folder you're using for this course. And we're just going to create a new folder in there. We're just going to call it week 9. So that's the folder we're in, or the week we're in. And then we'll go ahead and open up that folder into VS Code. So we created a folder called week 9. We opened it up into VS Code. Now we're going to create a new file. We're going to call it index.html. And we'll paste that starter code that we got from the Bootstrap website into that file. And we can go ahead and save that file Once you have that pasted and saved, go ahead and open up into your browser using the live server. So we can right click, open with live server. It's going to open up. Wrong one. There we go. And what you should see is something like this. It's up and side by side. All right, I do want to point out a few things that you can notice right away when this page loads. You'll notice that the font is not a serif font, right? That is the Bootstrap reboot CSS taking over. It sets the default font to a specific font. It actually uses a font that is specific to your operating system, it's not using a very specific font. It's using whatever the default font is for your operating system. I'll talk about that a little bit later. Okay, but this lets you know that we do have Bootstrap installed, and that's all it takes to get Bootstrap installed. And now we can utilize everything that Bootstrap has for us, which is a lot. Most of what we need to do to use Bootstrap is just adding specific classes to our element. Okay, so if we want to utilize their grid system, we just add the HTML and classes to those elements. If we want to use their buttons, we create a button and we add specific classes, and it just all works. And that's because Bootstrap has spent a lot of time creating all of these styles for us ahead of time. Okay. Any questions so far? Did anyone have trouble installing Bootstrap? Very, very straightforward. All right, let's take a look and learn a little bit more about what we can do with Bootstrap. All right, first thing we're going to talk about is typography. Remote up here. Okay, typography. So a couple things you need to know about how Bootstrap sets up its text inside of its reboot and the way it creates its items. The first thing you need to know is that it uses the rem unit. Okay, so what this means is that all the sizes are based off of the default size of the font. Okay, so it's not using ems, which are quite common, which kind of build up on top of each other. Rems is a little bit more specific. It only is based off of the base unit, which is typically 16 pixels. It avoids the margin top property. So none of its elements will ever have any margin top. It uses margin bottom instead. This is just something specific they decided to do. You can, of course, add margin top to elements if need be. This is that native font stack that I was referring to. So somebody very brilliant came up with the idea that we really should be utilizing native fonts to the operating system, because each operating system has a different font that it's its native. And so it has created this native font stack so that if you're on Mac OS, you'll see a different font as opposed to Windows, as opposed to iOS, as opposed to Android. It's all going to be based off of whatever the default font is for that operating. Other thing, it creates many different types of elements. For example, it has the custom classes for headers and display headers. We'll get a chance to see what those look like here in a moment. For example, it has these classes here. So it has a dot or an H1 through H6 class. So even if you're not using, by the way, you could use the tags H1 and through H6, which is probably what you do. But if there's ever you want to use those styles, that's not, for whatever reason, isn't that tag, you can add these classes and you'll receive those same styles. Okay? And then they also have these display classes as well. Again, I'll show you those in their example here in a moment. Here's the examples of the header. So at the top there, we have the H2, which has a specific style. Well, that same style can be applied to a paragraph tag if we just add the class H2. And then we can, of course, we can have an H1 here, and we can make its style look different by using the display class. Okay, so this is what I'm referring to. To utilize Bootstrap, all we're doing is adding classes to our element, and they'll style it the way Bootstrap has set it up. Okay? And again, many people consider the way Bootstrap has styled their elements as being very good. And they've done this whole modular system where it makes it very easy to add on and customize their element, which we'll get to see here in more detail. So that was the basic overview of typography. Now there are text utilities. These are specialized classes which allow us to customize our text. So we can align text using the text alignment classes. So we have text left, text right, center, and justify. Okay, so we can align our text. We can transform our text. So transforming is changing its casing. So we can do uppercase, lowercase, and capitalize. So these are the classes we would add to the element to change their text. Okay, so we're not writing the CSS anymore. We're doing everything inside of our HTML. We have font styles as well, so we can make it bold or light or italic. We can also change the text appearance. We can, for example, we can remove the underline. We can do decoration none. Or we can do a text reset, which will reset or will set the color of the text to its parent. Okay? This is going to be something we'd use, for example, for a link. If you have a link, links tend to have a special color. If you don't want it to have that special color, you want it to have a dark blue, or excuse me, a black or something, you can do text reset instead of setting over the color. Okay, and here's some examples of using that. Okay, so we have an alignment at the top, so there we just do text right, and our text would be aligned right. Text uppercase would make it all uppercase. Font weight bold, we'll bold it. And font italics will italicize. Okay. So again, these are just classes we can quickly add to our elements. This is how we're going to utilize Bootstrap. Now these are very simple examples and not super amazing examples, but I want to get you introduced to the idea this is how we're going to use Bootstrap, because next week when we talk about their grid system and how their grid system works, you'll see that it's just a matter of adding classes. All right, so let's go ahead and play around with the typography a little bit. So we can come back over here to our project. And right now we only have really just one piece, one element here we can work with. This is this H1, hello world. Okay, we can change its style. So for example, we can make this appear, even though it's an H1, we can make it appear to be an H4. Right? So I can change the way it's styled by using a class. I can just do H4. Okay, and I'll save that. It's going to refresh. You can see it got smaller. That's what an H4 will look like. Because I've applied the class H4, it's overriding its natural H1 style. Now, we can also see that this text is off to the left. Well, maybe I don't want it off to the left. I want it to be centered. Well, then I can just add another class here, text center. Okay, save that, and my text is now centered. And maybe I want it to be in all caps, right? So I can do text uppercase. Okay, again, just adding classes to this element, and I can manipulate the way it looks. Any questions about how that works? Again, that's pretty much how Bootstrap works. Now, if you don't remember these classes, because there's many of these classes, again, that's why I talk about just referring to the documentation. All that documentation is listed there. You just got to look for it, find out which class you want, then apply it. Constantly just have that bookmarked and jump back and forth. I still jump back to the Bootstrap when I'm working with Bootstrap. I'm like, oh, how do I do that again? Which class is it? I can just jump back and look. Any questions? All right, we got some more stuff to learn. All right, colors. So we learned about fonts, now let's learn about colors. So Bootstrap has a series of color classes that it will utilize, it's got this color schema that it utilizes across all its items. Okay, so don't think about it that Bootstrap is manipulating our HTML. What Bootstrap has done is written all the CSS already for us. It's done the hard work of writing all the CSS. We're just utilizing it. Okay, so let me, real quick, because I probably didn't show you this. Let's actually, well, that's the thing. If you don't want it to look like Bootstrap, yeah, you'll have to either manipulate it, use another class, or, I mean, if you're using Bootstrap, you generally just accept their styles. Now, not all frameworks are like that. Bootstrap is very opinionated in the way they style things. Other frameworks are less. They don't deal with I'm not going to deal with H1s. They're mostly about the grid or specific components like that. But let me show you. Here, I'm just going to open this up and take away this min here. So here is the Bootstrap style sheet. So again, we're going to talk about these in a little bit. These are make this a little bigger. These are CSS variables. We'll talk about that a little bit. Well, we talked about variables last week, or last time we met, not last week, but last time we met. These are the variables that Bootstrap has set up. And here's some of the styles they're resetting. Here's all the header tags. You can see they're removing the margin top. They're adding some bottom. This is their whole reboot that's setting up. If we scroll down further, this is all still just setting up the base styles. Here we can see, here's where the headers are happening. So we have the H1 through H6, and then you can see that they're adding these classes as well. Okay, so that they follow. Here are the display classes. We didn't really use those. Kind of forgot about those. Display classes, we can show you how that looks. And just if you keep going down through here, you can see all of this code that they've written. And there's a lot, by the way. You can see how much there is. Many, many, many lines of CSS that has been pre-written for us to utilize. Okay? So when I say we're just adding classes to our HTML, it's not that it's manipulating our HTML. We're utilizing the CSS that's already been written for us. We're just adding classes to our HTML. It saves time. That's the whole point. When Bootstrap was originally released, it was meant to be a prototype tool so that we could quickly create a site for prototyping purposes. Hey, my boss wants me to show how this works, so I'm just going to throw this up using Bootstrap, do a prototype. Then I'll write my own CSS that's more specific. Well, it got to be so good that people were just building whole sites off of Bootstrap, and so now it's become more robust. But that's the idea. It's a good place to start. It saves a lot of time that we don't have to repeat or reinvent the wheel by writing our own CSS. Any question over here? If you wanted to write your own, people write their owns all the time. I mean, that's what we have, hundreds of CSS libraries, and everyone's coming out with new stuff. And that's right. But oftentimes, you'll be utilizing the same thing. So for example, Bootstrap, one of the most common parts of Bootstrap is their grid system. Every site you're going to build probably is going to have a grid system, some way of laying out the elements. Okay? Now, Bootstrap was before we had Flexbox and CSS Grid. Version 4 actually uses Flexbox. CSS Grid is well supported. You can utilize that. It's actually hurting usage of Bootstrap because, hey, we can have CSS Grid now. Why would we use Bootstrap? Well, a lot of people are used to using Bootstrap and just writing in the classes, not having to write to CSS. Because you still have to write to CSS even if you're using CSS Grid. Okay? You still have to write to CSS. And with this, I'm like, don't have to forget it. Just add these few classes that I've memorized, and I can get my project moving quickly. And some people like that. Some people like to do their own thing. I mean, that's why every few years you have to learn a whole new system because somebody decided to create their own and it became really popular, and now that's taken over the world. Okay. You'll just wait till you get to Introduction to JavaScript, and you'll learn about all the frameworks that have existed and died out, and how you have to learn a new one every few years because the popular one faded away, and now there's a new one. It's always. That's what you have to look forward to. Any other questions before you? Yes. So if there are CDN crashes, highly unlikely. Okay, in the case that happens, like their CDN goes down, what would happen is your site just wouldn't load Bootstrap, and it would look weird or unstyled. Okay. Not really. I guess. I mean, a backup would be to download Bootstrap and then keep it on your own server, and some people choose to do that for that reason. But CDNs are very robust, and they have multiple redundancies. Chances of them failing are highly unlikely. Right? Many huge companies rely on CDNs. So, good question. Any other questions? All right, so anyway, back to our colors. So what I was saying is Bootstrap has a series of colors, variants that it likes to use for its different components. And they go off of these color names. So we have primary, secondary, success, warning, danger, info. I think there's some more. I think these are just the ones that fit on the slide. So these are the most common ones, though. So these are common names, and you want to remember these names because they're going to be applied to color, for text color, for background color, for buttons, for alerts. All sorts of things will utilize these color names. And they are specific for colors. For example, primary is a bright blue, secondary is a gray, success is green, warning is yellow, danger is red, info is kind of this aqua. Okay? I've memorized those because I've used these so many times. And those colors are specific to those, or those names are specific to those colors. So Bootstrap has done this so it conveys meaning. So danger, of course, is red. Typically, we associate red with danger, at least in the North America we do. Okay? We associate green with success. Green for go, red for stop. Right? That's how Bootstrap has set up their naming convention, so you can think of those colors. So, along with that, like I said, Bootstrap these colors can be used for text color as well as background color. We can also use these same names for buttons and alerts. We'll talk about those a little bit. So here's an example. So here we have the P tag with the text primary. Okay, so that's going to set up the text color to be kind of a blue color. The second one is the secondary color. Now that's a gray, so it probably doesn't show up by itself or it's changing the background. So if our text probably wouldn't show up, so we'll make our text white. Yeah. Okay, so that is colors. So again, you want to keep in mind with those list of names because they're going to be reused a lot. Images. So Bootstrap has a series of image classes that allow us to manipulate our image. The one you're probably going to use the most is image fluid, which will convert an image to scale with its parent to make it responsive, right? There's also image thumbnail, which will add a style that kind of looks like a thumbnail. It basically adds a little border around your image and rounds the corners a little bit. That's what the image there does. There's also rounded classes. Now, this is not specific to images. You can use the rounded classes for anything, but you can use them for images to round the corners of image, even to a point where it's a whole circle. There's also float classes, which can be used for images. Now, float classes aren't as common now, but you can still utilize them. Okay, and then there's the max auto, which can be used to center an image if it's a block image. So let me show you what these look like in code. So here's several examples of how you'd use these. So the very top one is a responsive image. So we have the image fluid. The next one's a thumbnail. Here's rounded. So we added this rounded class, and it adds, wish I would have looked it up exactly how many pixels, but it's like a 5-pixel rounded corner to your image, so it's kind of a rounded square. Here, this next one is rounded circle. That actually makes a circle on the image. Again, you can apply this to any element. These are not specific to elements. And then the last one, if you want to align your image right, you can do float right. Again, float your image right. This is how, again, how Bootstrap works. We just add classes, and it manipulates the elements for us automatically. All right, let's talk a little bit about CSS variables. Now, I showed you that list of variables, but we went through it very quickly. There are about 24 variables that are CSS variables that are built into or included with Bootstrap. Typically, these are used for read only. Now, you can override these variables, okay, but they won't really affect any of the Bootstrap code. They will affect any code that you write yourself, but none of the Bootstrap code, okay? So there is variables for colors, fonts, and breakpoints. The breakpoints aren't really as useful as you think. You can't really use them for breakpoints. They're meant for JavaScript purposes, so not really what we're going to be using, but you can utilize the colors and the fonts, and I'll show you an example of how that works. Again, changes to the CSS variables won't affect the Bootstrap styles. Bootstrap includes these CSS variables, but because Bootstrap is built on Sass, it uses Sass variables instead, and they get compiled differently. Again, we'll talk about that more when we talk about Sass towards the end of the class, towards the end of the course. Depends on the specificity. So if you include Bootstrap and then you include your own CSS and your CSS specificity is still higher than what Bootstrap is, which is probably true. Bootstrap tends to keep its styles at a low specificity, so it's easy to overwrite, then yours would take precedence. Okay? Generally, that's the way Bootstrap was written. Okay? Most of their styles have been written to make them low specificity so that they can be overwritten. Okay? Because they understand that you're not going to always want things to be styled exactly the way you want. Right? Generally, for like their header tags, they're just using the standard header, okay? The tag. So any class will obviously override it. Okay. Any other? All right. Here's that statement: breakpoints can't be used for media queries. The breakpoint CSS variables, again, are used for JavaScript. That's why they. All right. So here's some examples how you can use those variables. So at the top here, we're using the variable to set the font family. So there's a variable font family sans serif, and that will grab the list of font families that Bootstrap uses. And if we wanted to do the color, we can set the color to the blue. The blue is that primary color, so we can set it that way. So this is how we can utilize their CSS variables, their colors or their fonts inside of CSS that we've written. Okay. So let's do one more hands-on, or another hands-on. All right, so we are back to our hello world here. Let's go ahead and start changing some of the colors to our hello world here. So we can change the background color. So we can do BG, for example. Again, just adding more classes to this element. We can do BG primary, okay? And we can see that that adds a blue color to our element. Now, that makes the black a little hard to see, so I might want to add a class to change its color. So I can do text white, right? And that changes the text color. Again, just adding classes to my HTML. If I don't like the blue primary, I could change it I can switch the primary. Say I want to switch it to, I don't know, warning. This is going to be a kind of an orange color. Okay. So again, those are those style names: primary, secondary, success, warning, danger, info. That's the color. Those are things that you need to remember because you're going to be utilizing them a lot. Okay, so I can change my text here. This is white, but I can change it to danger. So it'll be a little weird red on orange. Okay, so that's kind of how colors work. Yep, if I don't like these colors at all, I'm like, oh, those colors are awful, I can just get rid of them here, and I can go down to my CSS and change it. I can write my own styles. So I can come, actually styles should go up top. So I can just create style, just do it this. Well, you could make it inline, but I'm going to create a class here. So if I want to take the text, well, let me actually override primary. So let me take primary and let me change primary, its color to cadet blue. This is kind of an aqua color. And now I can go here, primary. You can see that that changes it. Actually, let me. All right, so I've overwritten what Bootstrap has done just by adding a class. Okay, so again, you can override Bootstrap styles if you want. I think part of the advantage of using Bootstrap is that you don't want to spend time writing the styles. I'm just going to utilize what Bootstrap has. Yes, I mean you can change opacity on anything, right? Right. Yep. If you want to change opacity, you'd have to write an RGBA. I don't know the RGBAs offhand, but right. So it'd be RGBA, and then you'd write in some color, 112, 4, and then you can just add 0.5 like that, and that would change. That's some sort of red. I just made it. Okay, so that would give you kind of an opacity color. All right. Any other questions with colors? So another thing we can do is we can change, utilize their CSS variables. So if I want to change this color, again, we're going to change my primary to one of their existing colors, right? So to write a variable, we'd use the var keyword, and then we do dash dash, and then the name of the variable. So let's take a look. I had this back up here. So I'm going to scroll back up to the top here. Here's all the variables, right? And these are all of the different colors. So there's indigo here. Use that one. Seems like a fun color. So I can just use that variable here, can save it. And now my text primary should be an indigo. Not sure why that's not. Not really looking indigo, does it? Oh, okay. So look here. The text primary here, this is something you do have to be. So I was saying you can override it, but this is why we want to avoid this. Now, Bootstrap has decided that text primary is a class that they don't want you changing, and it's applied important. So anything I write is not overriding it. Of course, I can overpower it by going important as well. And because mine comes after it, it should override it. Yeah, there we go. Okay, but that's why you have to check. Okay, so with these specific classes, the text primary, those specific classes, it's trying to protect them. Other classes, it won't do that. Now, it's doing this because if you're applying this to an element that already has a class applied to it with a specific color, it's thinking, oh, you want it to be this color, okay? But you can't override it. But again, typically we wouldn't be using a Bootstrap class like text primary. We write our own. Hello world class. Any questions about how this kind of works? Again, typically, I know many of you are trying to ask, like, how do we override this? We want to customize it. Generally, you don't override what Bootstrap has done. You might create your own styles to manipulate things the way you want, but you don't really override Bootstrap. You're going to utilize what you can from it, and then you customize it where you need to. Eventually, once you get good enough, so again, Bootstrap is built off of Sass, and we'll cover Sass a little bit, not enough to actually do what I'm going to explain, but once you get good enough with Sass, you can actually download Bootstrap source files, the Sass files, and then just include the parts that you want. Right now we're including the entire framework, but we can just grab a few things that we want to use and just forget about the rest, and then you don't have all that overhead. All right, so we got a couple more interesting things to cover, and then we'll wrap up here. All right, so the last part we want to cover is the components. So I said that Bootstrap has an extensive component library. We're just going to cover a few of the components today. So extensive pre-built components they can utilize. These components will have UI elements like buttons and complex plugins like the carousel, right? Where we can have this running carousel that will allow you to cycle through images. Components typically only require you to add appropriate HTML. So we just insert the HTML that we want, we'll customize it to meet our needs, and then you're good to go. It will work. Even if it requires JavaScript, generally it will, because we're including their JavaScript script, that script is looking for specific HTML to function, and you don't have to write anything else. All right, so we're going to cover just two components today, and the first one is the buttons. This is probably one of the most common components being used. So Bootstrap has custom buttons that can be used anywhere. We can apply these styles to buttons. We can also apply them to links and to the inputs as well, like for form inputs. Bootstrap, you can customize the color of these buttons and the appearance and their size as well. Okay. Right, so, and the classes can be used for anchors and input tags as well. So let's take a look at this. So here we have what the primary button looks like. So remember that primary color? It's kind of a blue. Well, this would create a blue class, or a blue button, okay? That's primary. If we wanted a green button, we can use the green success. Okay, so then we have, sorry, let me bring up my pointer here. So right here we have this button outline success. So this is going to create a kind of a green border button, and when you hover over it, it turns green. Okay, and then we have this danger button. This is a red button. You can notice that it also has this BTN small. Well, that makes it a small button, a small red button. Okay, so these are buttons that have already been created, styles that have already been created. We can get those buttons, again, just by adding classes. Okay, and I'm going to go through an example of building some buttons here in a moment. All right, the other component I wanted to cover is alerts, because it's another simple component that we can use. So alerts provide us with messaging. That's the whole idea. So imagine if you're filling out a form and you do something wrong, it pops up with a red alert saying, you forgot to fill out this. That's what alerts are. Or, congratulations, you won, right? Those are the alerts. And Bootstrap has those already created for us. And they come in a variety of colors which happen to match the same style colors that they use everywhere else. Okay, so here we have two alerts. The first one is a primary alert. Again, this is kind of a blue color. That would look like. The second one is the danger, so that's kind of a red color alert. Okay. Again, we're just adding classes. We can add it to really any element. Typically, it's a div or a paragraph. Create our alert. Okay, so those are just a handful, or two components out of dozens of components that they have. But we're going to play around with those because they're quite simple to use. So one more hands-on. So we'll jump back to our code here. And let's add some buttons to our styles here, or to our HTML. Okay, so after my H1 that have overloaded with a bunch of classes, I am going to create a button. And I'm just going to put button here for text. I'm going to save it so we can see our button here. Okay, so there's my button. That's my unstyled button. Okay, all I've done is button with button in the middle. Okay, it's my unstyled button. Now, let me style this button with some Bootstrap classes. So I'm going to add a class to my button here. All buttons, this is true for anchor tags as well, or input tags. We're going to start with BTN. That's the base button class for Bootstrap. So we do need to include that. That's the base one. And then we can go beyond that to kind of style it. So this will just create a base button. So if I save this, you can see that it doesn't have any background, but it kind of changed the font a little bit. That's because, again, we haven't really chosen what styles we want for this button. Okay, so if we wanted a blue button, I can do BTN primary. Okay, and we can save that. And we can see that now I have a blue button. Notice that it has a hover state as well applied to it, so it darkens it a little. Okay, so that's coming with it as well. It's not just the base color. It changes the color. Okay. We can make this button big. So I can do BTN LG, that's for large. Okay, you can tell it got a little bit bigger. Question? Bigger for you. Right, so all we've done is we have this button element. We've added the classes BTN, BTN-primary, and BTN-LG for large. No, because a button has specific variants associated with it, different types, all we need to do is do BTN primary, and that will change both the text color and the background color. Okay. Right. So for text, then we would do text dash primary or text dash danger to change the color. But because buttons are more of a component, they have this like this. So we can change this color. Now this is the primary color, but if we wanted a success button, a green button, this is button dash success. We can save that, and we can see that now we have a green button. And this can also be applied, like I said, this doesn't just get applied to a button, it can be applied to anchor tags or inputs as well. We might need. There we go. I don't know why they didn't. All right, so that's the button. Fairly straightforward. It's one of the more simpler components you're going to use. That's why I want to demonstrate it. I also want to show you the alert. So we'll do a div here. We're going to do a class. Just like the button, you start with alert, and then you can do alert danger, and then warning. All right, save that, and that's what an alert will look like. pretty handy when you want to relay messages to the user side of your website. And again, just like the button, just like our text, we can change the color of our alert, but just by changing the color of the class. So this is alert danger. What we can do, so we can do like a warning, which is going to be more of an. And that's alerts and buttons. So those are just a couple of the more simpler components in Bootstrap. We will not have time to cover, like I mentioned before, we will not have time to cover all of the components. But again, if you go to the documentation, the Bootstrap documentation, you can go right here. So by the way, from the home, here's Get Bootstrap. You can go to Documentation, and you can just go to Components. This is a list of all the components that they provide for you. That comes with it out of the box. Okay, so right here, at the very top is the alerts. That's what I was showing you. So you can see all the examples of the different alerts that you can utilize. Here's the buttons. So again, different style buttons you can use. Again, you can see what you can do with them. They do have like button groups here. This is grouping buttons together, so they're smacked up next to each other. That can be pretty handy for different UI elements. Again, this is what Bootstrap is doing. They've written all of the CSS for you, so you don't have to. We just add the HTML and we run with it. Question? Yeah, they do have a nav system here. See, I forgot where they put their nav. Their documentation. There it is, nav bars. Okay, so we have nav bars, right? So this is what a nav bar looks like. They have this little drop down. But they do have a hamburger menu. Typically, revert to responsive mode here so I can show you, because they won't show up until you can actually see it here. That's their hamburger menu. They're using their own framework. But you can see that this pops up here. So if I get large enough, yeah, so there we go. See, it stopped, it popped up, and I'm going to get smaller. So I hit a certain point, and then it turns into a hamburger menu. That's functional. Okay, and that's given to you with Bootstrap. You just have to add their classes and their HTML, and you get a hamburger menu. That's responsive out of the box. Right, so Bootstrap has its own breakpoints. We're going to cover that next week when we talk about their grid. I'll show you the different breakpoints that they have. Yeah, they have specific breakpoints. So this way. So let's take a look at that. Well, again, we'll cover it more detail. Right, so right here are their different breakpoints. So they have extra small is below 546, and it goes all the way up to 1200 pixels. Right, so they have different series of breakpoints, and that's how they broke it down. And when you install it, you get all those breakpoints. Right, and it has all of the media queries. So when you do that, it's already added all the media queries for those breakpoints. So it will break when Bootstrap has decided those breakpoints. Yeah. So let's go back to the nav bar here. Yeah, there's a lot of information here. Yeah, we will talk about nav bars. So that's one thing I'm going to try and cover. We'll see how things work out because I don't want to overload you. So like I said, next week we're going to be covering the grid system because that's probably the most important part of Bootstrap is understanding the grid system, and it's quite complex. And if we have time, I would like to also cover navigation and nav bars, so you have that because that's probably the next most popular thing. Okay, and when we go into that, we'll go into details, and you can kind of understand a little bit how their breakpoints work, and you are kind of beholden. One thing about Bootstrap is it's pretty opinionated. When you use the Bootstrap, you're going to be kind of relying on the way they've just structured things. If you don't like the way they structure things, you might have to look for another framework. And there's lots of them to choose from. Some that are less opinionated that just kind of give you sort of a bare minimum of stuff to help you. Okay. Again, I'm just showing you one. To pick up another one is pretty much they all work. All right, any questions about Bootstrap? Okay, that brings us to the end of our lecture. Okay, so like I've been saying, next class, Thursday, will be a work period. Okay, so, and again, I will be a little late. Okay, I will be coming, I'm just going to be late. So if you want to come and work on your midterm project, which is due Thursday? Thursday, yes, it's due Thursday. So you want to work on your midterm project, I will show up. The PA should be there. We do have a PA in the class. He should be there, hopefully on time. You can always ask him for help until I get there. Okay, so work period on Thursday. That is definitely meant to give you some time to work on your midterm project. How's that coming? Everyone's going to be ready for getting done on Thursday? Okay. Grades have been submitted. You may not have seen them because I did it right before class showed up. So I've got all your grades out. Do apologize that it took me so long. I have major class overload. Trying to keep up. I'm going to try and be better about getting the grades out sooner. So, but all your grades are out. Your midterm is due on Thursday, work period. Next week, we are going to be covering more Bootstrap. Like I said, we'll be covering the grid system and maybe navigation if I feel like we have enough time. Any last questions? All right, there is about 30 minutes left of class. You are welcome to stay. I'll be here and wait if you want to work. Otherwise, have a good evening, and I'll see you on Thursday.